mute. By default, everybody's going to be muted. You can start and stop your video, number 2 there. And if you want to pop out the chat window, which is over on the right, the white vertical thing over here, that number 3, you can pop that open. Number 4 indicates who the chat is going to. Right now, the default is everyone. You can open that up and select individual people. If you have any questions that you want to pose during the presentation, go ahead and select me in there and send me your question, and I will put it in the queue for Dr. Ellen. And then, as she mentioned before, number 5 up there is speaker view, and you can select, or you can toggle that between speaker and gallery. I would opt for speakers so that you will have Ellen highlighted while she's talking, because her slides are going to be shared as well. And I believe, unless things have changed, Ellen is going to ask you to stand up and move around a little bit. So if you need to make sure you have a little bit of space around you, nothing too crazy. We're not doing burpees or anything like that, but just make sure you can stand up, maybe do a little bit of a lunge, and not going to knock anything over or set anything on fire.
Yeah, no fires, please. We
No
want
fires.
we want to keep everybody safe here if at all possible.
Carrie's here.
Hi, Carrie.
Hey, how are you?
Here comes Tom. So a couple people coming in here, but and Amanda's coming in, jumping on. Hi, everybody. I think we got a lot of folks on here. Some people tuning in on the recording too here. We've gotten a few emails in the next couple hours saying, I want to be there, but I can't. Now that the state of Michigan is starting to open up little by little, we're starting to see people going back to work and having a little bit more duties. So by all means, we will be recording this. So just as a reminder for those of you who just jumped on, hi, Sherry. For those of you who just jumped on, we will be recording this. So if you don't want your picture and your video up there, by all means, you can use the stop video button on the bottom, and then you can still see and hear everything on there. But once we start the presentation, everybody's picture is going to go away anyway. But just thought we would let everybody know ahead of time. So I think we probably have most of the people here, so we can probably get going. Jeremy, do you have anything else you want to say?
Just introduce you.
Okay.
As most people know, we are Mindset PT based in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and this is Dr. Ellen giving the presentation today. This is part 2. You can see part 1 by heading to our website, go to the blog, and you can see that webinar is also on YouTube, so you can head over there. And Ellen has been practicing sports med, athletic training, and physical therapy for over 20 years. She is an excellent practitioner and caretaker. If you have any issues, I highly recommend you contact her, reach out. We solve pain. That's what we do. And without further ado, Dr. Ellen.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. It's just fun to see all these faces, and there's even more people coming in here. Good to see everybody. Thanks so much for coming. As Jeremy said, this is a chance for us to give some information to you, answer any questions. So if you do have questions throughout the talk, shoot them in the chat section. Jeremy will catch them, and we'll make sure to address all of them. We've even blocked off some extra time there. So we're really excited to have you here and go over this information. If you weren't here for the last one, that's totally okay. Like Jeremy said, it's on our website, and there's not just ours. We have an amazing immunity presentation from Carrie Palmer. She's on here. She's amazing. You're going to want to check out that information from her. We also had Dr. Alexandra Copeland come on and talk to us about eye health in the digital age. And then we also even worked with mental health providers, Ashley True, and then Brian Face from Face to Face Financial Planning to talk about some considerations for financial considerations during COVID and what might the market be doing, just so you can make better choices about your life and your overall health, everything from mental health to financial health. And today we're going to be working on the physical health. So again, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my desktop here, and we'll get going as far as the presentation goes. I don't think you care too much about the Zoom meeting there. Let's go ahead and get flying. All right, so like we said, this is part 2 for learning how to maintain your body for that long-lasting health and mobility that we so all want, that is affecting our bodies in the sense of pain, mobility, and just overall high-level function. So, oops, sorry here. Let's go here. So let's review a little bit from our last talk, right? We have this amazing organization to our systems, and the human body is meant to move. So when we look at this musculoskeletal system, if you look at how it's designed, that is engineered specifically, for movement, okay? And that is the key, what we're gonna talk about today. So this glute muscle right here, what we talked about last time, it's meant for power. It is not meant to be sat on all the time. So if we know that's something that's crucial to our biology, we need to take advantage of it. And our system is made up of our brain and our body, a whole bunch of other complex stuff in between there. But we have this amazing ability to generate control at the software level as well as the hardware level. We're going to spend components today on both, okay? Because all of your systems integrate. So you can't have one operating without the other. The other amazing part about us as humans is we are designed to adapt to stimulus. And that is actually called Wolff's Law. So I'm going to read that for you so that you guys understand the principles behind that. But ultimately, a human person or even an animal will adapt to the loads under which it is placed. So if loading on a particular bone increases, the bone will remodel itself time and time again to become stronger to resist that sort of loading. The inverse is also true as well. So if the loading on the bone decreases, the bone will become less dense and weaker due to the lack of stimulus required for that continued remodeling. So this week, I got a wonderful call from a woman in Seattle who was having back pain. And one of the first questions I asked her, I said, well, what do you think started as your problem? And she said, well, I'm not sure, but I had COVID-like symptoms. She didn't have COVID-19, but she had a COVID-like viral pneumonia. And she was in bed for 2 weeks. So it's not like she got into a car accident, but she reduced the stimulus placed on her body. And she became very, very weak. And she also started to notice changes in her bones. So she eventually got a pinched nerve in her spine because the muscles they got so weak, they weren't stabilizing her spine, and it began to kind of collapse. And collapse is a little bit more of an aggressive word than I like to use, but it indicates the point that her scaffolding system and her muscular system wasn't holding herself in place because she became very weak. So that stimulus goes both directions. If you have a high stimulus or very, very low stimulus, your body is going to attempt to adapt. And that adaptation principle is one that we utilize to try to get the body to change into ways that we want it to. And that's some things we're going to talk about today. So when we were here last time, we also discussed the laws of physics and how they apply to the human body. And that first principle of position equals power. So if you can't get into a good position, you won't be able to generate optimal power. And that'll be the first exercises that we're going to go through today, is getting into the right position at first. And in our system, in our body, we have organizational hierarchy. So we want to be aware first of the core, or that spine first principle we talked about last time. And that core acts like the chassis of a car. So it is your stabilization system where everybody bounces off of and works off of. Your engines and your power should come from a different place. So in the lower half, our primary engine is our hip complex. In the upper half, it's our shoulder and scapular complex. Our secondary engines are knees and elbows. Tertiary engines are ankles and feet, hand and wrist. So when you're synchronizing movement and you're organizing your movement, you want to know who should come first and who should come second and who should come third in the majority of our movements. And then lastly, we touched on the first joint rule. And that is a rule that describes that the joint you move first is the one you will load the most. And this doesn't even mean, like, if you loaded your knees for the first 10% of the range of motion and then you loaded your hips, the rest of the 90%, you still had the greatest force dump in that first 10% into the knees. And as we talked about in our organization, that's not your primary engine, that's not where we want force to go at first. So hopefully that's just a nice little review of where we want to organize our tissues, how we want to sequence our movement. But I said we were gonna move, so today we're gonna get right into it. So position equals power. We've talked about that. So in order to have proper position, you have to have proper breath control. If you don't, that is the quickest thing to take you out of position. So let's talk about breath control and breath in general. Your body, absolutely every single system requires oxygen to operate. So you literally require oxygen to live. We know that. That's why it's so crucial that we have good breath control. Everything from cognition to digestion requires good breath control. So effective breathing can provide mental clarity. It can improve your sleep habits. It can improve your digestion, your body's immune response, which Carrie talked about in the first webinar we did. And it can also reduce stress levels. On the flip side, bad breath can alter mental clarity for the negative, and it can change and affect your sleep patterns. It can also slow your digestion and also reduce your immune response and increase stress levels. That's not what we want to do in the body. We want to improve things. So if you think about it, you have over 20,000 breaths per day. So if you have bad habits in your breathing, that's a lot of bad repetitions. And for my runners out there, let's say you heel strike, okay? We know that's not ideal in running, okay? That's a deceleration force, and it causes all sorts of abnormal forces to go upward into the leg, into the hip, and into the back, causing pain and problems. So if you see a runner and they go out and do a long run, they're gonna get 20,000 repetitions in a run. And if you get 20,000 repetitions of heel striking, something is going to break down. So the same applies to your breath. If every day you're having 20,000 bad breaths, okay, there's no mint that will undo that. So it's really important to consider the effective breath, but also remember, this is probably like the quickest investment in your health you can get, because if you improve your breath, wow, the compounding effect of 20,000 breaths per day can be monumental, and it can give you immediate changes in all of those areas I just mentioned. So when you have bad breath, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute, we call this accessory breathing. It will actually trigger more stress and cortisol release in your body, which then makes you breathe even worse, which causes more stress. So you end up being in this downward cycle of stress and inefficient breathing patterns that just leave you in a place that you don't really feel great. The other thing about breath control, if you have poor breath control, you expend 10 to 15% more energy breathing. So one of the patients I have right now, she came to me with neck pain, jaw pain, and some migraines and things like that. And the first thing I noticed is she breathes up here a lot. And this places her neck and head under a great deal of tension, 20,000 repetitions per day. So the first thing we talked about was not neck stretching. Of course her neck is tight. It's under a great deal of pressure and stimulus, but not the good kind. So I have to reduce that. Just stretching it doesn't treat the root problem, right? It may help the symptoms for like 10 seconds. The next time she takes a breath, here comes that stimulus and that tension again. So treating the root cause in her breath has made a monumental difference for her in mental clarity. In addition, she gets good sleep. She falls asleep better, she stays asleep, and she wakes rested. And during the day, she's not expending 10 to 15% extra energy on breath. She's much more efficient, so now she actually has more energy. So all of this issue with breath should not be downplayed, because it's very, very powerful. So when we look at breathing, you can see my cursor here. Even though the arrow shows in the mouth, preferably I'd actually rather it go through the nasal cavity. That is where we have more filtration. It's much more natural to breathe this way and then have it come down the back of the throat into the trachea and into the lungs. The way that this happens should be with this muscle called the diaphragm, okay? The diaphragm, when you are about to breathe in, it's resting in a dome-like fashion. And as you breathe in, it contracts and lowers down so that air can come inward, okay? So as you breathe in, your diaphragm will lower, okay? So therefore, we want air to go down. And we want our ribs on the lower aspect to expand and open and our stomach to relax and fill with air, okay? As you exhale, it will passively return. So I want to say that again so you can start to visualize. Even if you've never worked on your breathing before, this is a perfect time to learn. So close your eyes and visualize with me. As you inhale, your diaphragm lowers, your stomach relaxes, softens, and fills with air. And then as you exhale, it will just come back inward. So inhale, stomach softens and opens. Exhale, it returns. So release the tension in your abdominal muscles. Let it go. Nobody's there watching you, okay? Let it open and relax. Take the tissue down. Take the tension down. Okay? So once you learn to control this breath, and we're going to go into a much deeper practice here in a second, you're going to start to feel your nervous system, we call this down regulate. Okay? You're going to be able to literally, in that moment, modulate your stress. Because you can use this to trick your brain to come out of that fight or flight response. We talked in the past about cortisol, and if you haven't seen, again, Carrie Palmer's immune webinar, watch it. She talks about cortisol as well, and how during times of stress, cortisol will be released and it'll bathe your brain and your heart and your digestive tissue. That will trigger your nervous system to be in fight or flight, okay? So you need to calm that down because we have too much cortisol typically running in our body during this time of stress with COVID and during overall our life of just constant stimulus. So breath is one of those most powerful tools in your arsenal for better health. It can give you that immediate return on your investment here, okay? The other piece about why this is so powerful is we have connection points literally at your tissues with things like your hip flexors, a muscle called the quadratus lumborum. And so those are muscles inside of the core and in your back that control things like your spine, your ribs, and your pelvis. So those tissues, when you learn how to breathe, I know a lot of you have tight hip flexors because we sit too much. So if you learn how to breathe, you can also then learn how to directly and neurologically relax these connected tissues. So this is pretty darn powerful. The next most powerful thing that breath can control is your pelvic floor. And so if anyone has had any trouble with, maybe they have a little bit of leakage when they laugh or cough, things like that, that's an indicator of a weak pelvic floor. And so the pelvic floor functions as a diaphragm on your lower half that mirrors what your diaphragm for breath does at the top. And they should flow in sync with each other. If they don't, that's an indicator of dysfunction. But if you do have dysfunction, learning breath control can regain that control so that you don't have issues like leakage when you laugh, or you would never go to the trampoline park with your kids because you would be worried about losing control of your bladder. Things like that. So breath, take home point, very powerful. So let's really get into a deep practice here because we need this in order to generate proper positioning. So one hand goes on your heart, one hand goes on your belly. Okay, and you'll notice I don't have any other words on here because I want you to close your eyes and just feel and listen. So one hand on your heart center, The other hand on your belly. So let's go from top to bottom. You should have your lips together. Your teeth should be apart. And your tongue, not just the tip, your whole tongue should be resting on the roof of your mouth. That will allow your airway to be in the most optimal position to get as much airflow in through your nose, into the trachea, and into your lungs. So lips together, teeth apart, tongue resting on the roof of your mouth. That's your start position for breath. Inhale, diaphragm lowers and your stomach expands around the air. You don't force it in, just let it fill. Keep your eyes closed and visualize when you were a kid and you were filling a water balloon. You hooked that water balloon around the faucet and you slowly turned the faucet on so that the balloon began to fill with water. And once it got to a certain point, it just expanded around the filling water. But if you turn the faucet on super high, it's going to create too much pressure and it's going to actually come off of the faucet. So we don't want too much pressure. We want a little bit of pressure so that your body can gently expand. When we're under stress and tension, we hold this area very tight and don't allow breath to come here. So if you're finding resistance, that's okay, that's normal. But the more you practice on your inhale here, getting that to come down and into the belly, the better you will find your breath. Now the abdomen is 360 degrees. So as you're focusing on this inhale, I want you to think about filling the front of your body, and then the side body area, and then even getting expansion into the low back. All of those tissues should be able to open and slide and glide on each other. We could go for weeks about the things you should feel here, from your pelvic floor to these small little multifidi muscles in your back. But for today, just think about expanding and sending breath down to that area even more. All the way around to your back. On your exhale for this section, it should just be a nice retraction back, very, very gentle, almost passive. Now we're going to do it wrong. So I want you to breathe into the hand that's at your chest. Feel that raise. And do you feel how it stops short of what you can do with your abdominal breath? That's because this is not as efficient. And you should feel the resistance in the tissues and that it's just not that comfortable. Okay? Because it's not. This is not the optimal way to breathe. And if you went even higher and sent your breath above your top hand into your clavicle, into your neck, where you're almost shrugging your shoulders up, you're going to find even less room and even more tension. And for those of you who breathe that way on a regular basis, that might even feel like you need to rub the top of your shoulders, right? Because there's thickness there. There's knots there. I know there's a couple people on this phone call that I used to work with and rub that area a lot because that's an area of high stress and tension, but we can take that down in a way. So send that breath now back down into the abdomen and feel that expansion and how much room you have down there. And we're gonna do an exercise now, and we're muted, so you guys can go full tilt on this if you want to. But sitting up tall, again, hand on your heart, hand on your belly. I want you to inhale for at least a 4 count and fill that space. But now let's focus on the exhale. And I want you to exhale while making an S sound. like that. You should be able to do that for at least an 8-second count. My hope is you can go even longer as you open these tissues. So your goal now is I want you to do this on your own, and I'm going to demonstrate a few. You're going to breathe in. As you exhale with that S, you're going to go all the way out. Every single air molecule needs to be out of your body. So you should have maximum contraction of your abdomen, pelvic floor, everything in your core should be contracting at the end of that S, okay? And then when you literally can't do any more, relax. And what will happen is the air will just flood in. You won't even have to try. But this is a great way to get relaxation, find new range of motion in your breath, to be able to establish better positions. So let's do this together if you're not already there. Hand on heart, hand on belly. Inhale into belly. Exhale all the way with your S. And you should feel when you let go of that belly, whoa, the air that comes in, if you left this hand relaxed, it flushes in. I want you to do that 2 more times on your own. Hand on the chest, hand on belly. Inhale into the stomach. Exhale every molecule out. That feels so good. One more time. You guys do it again. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. Good. Breathe all the way out. All the way out until you literally have nothing left. Now at this point, I'm going to unmute everybody. Okay, so you guys should hear me now. You're welcome to unmute yourself, but I want to know what people felt. Because I know every time I do that, I feel like not only my breath I can get a lot further, but my shoulders relax, my jaw relaxes. I can get even a hair kind of lightheaded. It feels wonderful. So if anybody's comfortable, I'd love to know what your experience was, especially since we don't have 50 people on right now.
Felt like a purge.
What do you mean by that?
Like all the bad air was out and fresh, clean air came in.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would say.
I could feel everything in my shoulders and chest just kind of settle in and melt. Just everything relaxed in me.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. I appreciate that. Carrie, I think you were going to say something.
I was just going to say it was just energizing. Taking that breath in, it was just, yeah, it just gave me this burst of energy almost.
Wonderful. I hope so.
I feel like I got a workout.
Yeah, sure. You can really get to some deeper layers of your abdominal muscles there. And by doing this, obviously the whole physical breath stuff, but the other principal real reason to do this full exhale is to get that full abdominal contraction is because if anyone has ever done mobility work in contract and relax technique, where you contract a muscle really hard, and then immediately afterward, there's this inhibition phase where you can get better relaxation and mobility. That's what we just did with breath. So you can make it physical, you can make it neurological, but either way, you get this amazing response with a simple exercise. Doing 3 reps, you've just changed. And hopefully now you feel, I don't have to send breath up there. It's easier to send breath into your stomach, have more range of motion in there, because that is key, like we talked about, to be able to generate proper positioning. Okay, so I'm going to mute everybody back again, unless anybody else wants to say anything else before I do that.
Like, can you do it flat?
You can definitely do it when you're doing this forced exhale breath. Sometimes that's a little bit easier to do sitting because it creates an abdominal contraction similar to a crunch. So if you're on your back, you have to do that against gravity, and it's just a little bit more complicated, a little bit more difficult. So when you do it sitting up, then you don't have to work against that just by the position alone. But you can, but it's just not always as easy on the contraction part. But when we're teaching just the straight breath work, I usually start laying on your back. That's a good question. Anybody else? Okay, you're all muted. Okay, so let me get back here and share my screen again. Oops, not that one. You guys don't want to see my photos. There we go. Okay, so now we're heading into standing. So now I've taken away the picture, so I can't see anybody. You probably can't see each other very well. So go ahead, let's stand up now. So we've talked a lot about the importance of position, and we talked a little bit about the wall test. So if you have a wall near you, go ahead and stand with your back against the wall. And as you can see in this picture, A is what we want to achieve. So our head is on the wall, our mid-back is on the wall, and our buttock is on the wall. So this is the natural curves of the spine here. And you can see there's a little bit more curve here at the neck. There's a nice curve here at the low back, but overall, his feet are stacked over his hips, which are stacked underneath his head. And so this would be ideal for efficiency, right? If you start to notice those 3 contact points are a little harder to achieve for you, take a peek at this image and see which one you are like. So in this case, option B, this person, the silhouette here, has an extended, what we call lordosis, or extension at the lumbar spine, causing his buttocks to poke outward, okay, and his chest to flare this way. That would not be an ideal position for anyone, especially if you're gonna go out and do any physical activity. Because if you think about it, all that work we just did with the diaphragm, when your ribs flare up and outward like this, it's really difficult for your diaphragm to contract downward. Therefore, it's very difficult to belly breathe in this position. So you're much more likely when the ribs flare like this to send breath upward into the neck. Okay, and that's not just for physical activity. This is even sitting in a chair or standing at a cocktail party. This would not be ideal. You will expend a lot more energy breathing in this position than you will in position A. If we go to position C, if you find you can get your mid-back in line with the wall, but it's very difficult to get your head on the wall or your butt on the wall, we've now reversed things a little bit here, okay? So this is a very tight thoracic spine, most likely. It could be some issues here at the neck, but overall, not being able to get your head stacked over your body and your hips driving forward, you can again start to see this is very inefficient, okay? So in that position, we finally have another one, which is where our butt is out, but the rest of our body is stacked. This is another common one, but again, the ribs aren't flared. However, the pelvis is dipped forward into what we call an anterior pelvic tilt. You can start to see here that your ability to control breath downward is going to be affected by this as well. And then in addition, we talked a little bit about the pelvic floor. We've literally changed the angle of the pelvic floor here and the angle of the abdominal muscles. So your ability to generate core stability here will be majorly affected. Option E, not my worst favorite. I don't mind this one as much. This is just merely really rigid stiffening of the spine and reduction of your natural curves. So you can see the chest is kind of lifted here and it's a little bit stiff. What'll happen here is you're just not leaving this area soft to allow natural movement. We're holding it too rigid. And this is where I see people, they either choose to generate stability or breathe. And when you should be able to do both, okay?
Hey, Elle, before you move on.
I see a bunch of questions coming in.
Yep, just the illustration doesn't do a great job of it, but heels are supposed to be against the wall as well, correct?
Great question. Yes, ideally heels would be against the wall. So you have your feet against the wall, your butt against the wall, your back, and your head. Great question.
Yep, and posture C. Can
Yes,
you run over the issues with that again?
absolutely. So in posture C, you'll see the contact point will be that upper back, but it's really hard for this person to get their buttocks on the wall and their head on the wall. So a lot of times this is because this thoracic curve is too prominent. We call this thoracic kyphosis. This is the start of kind of that hunchback position. And it makes the thoracic spine by nature is very rigid, right? Its job is to protect your ribs, your heart, some of your organs, things like that. So it's meant to be a protective source. But over time, if it still has mobility, but if that's not worked, or maybe you have a medical condition, such as like degenerative changes in the spine or ankylosing spondylitis, when things begin to fuse, this area begins to show increased prominence, therefore throwing off the alignment of your head on your body, as well as your body on your pelvis and hips. So you're gonna see distended abdominals. So it's really difficult when your belly is out like this to contract your abs. So if there's any women in here, which I know there are, who've been pregnant, it's really hard to contract your abs when you're pregnant. And this is basically the pregnant lady position. Okay, so it makes the difficulty for core stability and as well for breath control to go downward. Breath control will go upward on this just because there's so much stiffness down here. You'll send it upward. Any other ones, Jeremy?
Nope, that's good for now.
Okay, so that wall test is a wonderful way to check yourself on your position and your alignment. And then we'll be doing some things in a minute, and then you can always go back to this and check. But today, consider this your baseline, right? And so from here, this is your point that you can compare yourself with, because you need to have a baseline in order to determine if you're actually making progress. So that wall test determines position. Another position / movement test is, can you maintain your position on that wall in the alignment that you have, meaning your head, your mid-back, your butt, and your heels on the wall, and all of the spaces in between? Can you retain that while you lift your arms overhead? And if you lift your arms overhead, are you actually in full range of motion of your shoulder?
And when you say arms over your head, can you cue thumbs,
Yep.
thumbs
So
up?
watch me, your thumbs are going to lead the way here. So this is the perfect test that I mentioned in the first series. We talked about that volleyball player who had a stress fracture in her low back. And so when she came in, one of the first things I looked at was her shoulder range of motion. And she was missing a substantial percentage of her motion. And so if she did not have range of motion in her shoulder, she had to take it from somewhere else. And she took it from her lumbar spine when she went to serve. So if you can see me here, if I only have this much range of motion down here, and I need to get my hand behind my head to serve that volleyball, I'm going to extend at my low back to get it because I don't have it at my shoulder. So how is everybody doing with this one? Can you get your arms straight overhead with your thumbs leading the way without changing your contact points or the spaces between your neck and your low back? How's everybody doing? Actually, what I'm going to do is I'll stop sharing my screen and unmute everybody here. Okay, so anybody who wants to comment? I see Sherry's doing it. Sherry, can you get your arms up straight without changing your spine position?
Yep.
Nice. Very good.
And we're supposed to keep our position on the wall as we were before, right? And
Exactly.
move the arms up, okay.
Able to have full shoulder range of motion without moving your spine. You will notice your shoulder blade will move. That's not part of your spine. Okay, good point, good question. Okay, so if you can't stabilize that spine and dissociate that between your engines, right, that's going to lead to something called spinal faults. All right, spinal faults is when you have one vertebrae on vertebrae and they don't stabilize and they have this extra movement in there. Well, that is how vertebrae degenerate over time. It's basically like when you're making guacamole and you're squishing it and grinding it to make your beautiful guacamole. You don't want to do that to your vertebrae. So it's really important to be able to stabilize your spine and then have peripheral movement. And this is just one of those ways to do that. Okay? So there's lots of reasons on that picture why you might not have good posture, but that posture and that positioning is directly linked to that breathing, and then as well things like tight hips, the thoracic spine, and overall spinal alignment. Okay, does anyone have any questions on that before we move on?
Just real quick, depending on where people are on that spectrum, it's going to be probably a different approach to get to A, depending on where you are.
Absolutely. There's lots of different reasons for why that can occur, but the key is being aware, first off, that there's an issue with the problem in the position. Then we can talk about things to improve that. And actually tune in next week because we're going to go over tension in tennis balls, and it's going to be how do you address those pieces in one by one kind of issues and all things that you can do with a cheap little tennis ball.
And that will probably help. Somebody asked about putting the heels against the wall causes significant discomfort in the calves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that might
Smash them.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're getting discomfort in the calf, that's a whole nother reason, especially as you tension the system and reach overhead. But that's something we can totally work on. There's lots of reasons why that can happen, but a lot of times it's because there's an issue up top and you're not able to get your body over your feet as well. And so you have to compensate with the calf contraction. So we can talk about that next week too. I'll make sure to put that in. Okay.
And I don't know if this would be helpful or not, but before you move on, one of the cues there was ribs down. Arms overhead with ribs down. Do you want to go over the sort of the thumb test with sternum and your pubis so that when somebody doesn't have a wall to stand against, how they can cue themselves that their ribs are down?
Absolutely. So you can see me here. So when I'm working with people in the clinic, I'll put one thumb on the bottom of your sternum, which is your xiphoid process. Okay, you'll feel there'll be a little bit of a triangle, an upside down triangle piece at the bottom of your sternum. And so I'll put one thumb there and then one thumb right above my pubic symphysis. So between your pubic symphysis and your belly button, about halfway in between there. Because if I can see this relationship, then I have an idea. If it comes up, not only my ribs are flaring upward, but my back is in spinal extension. Or if they come together, I'm now in lumbar flexion. But either way, I've changed the position of our spine, which as we know is one of the rules we don't want to do under load. Okay, if we're doing yoga and mobility work, that's a different story. But if we're under load and we're asking our engines to perform, we need to make sure we're aware of that relationship. So this position here is a great one that you can utilize to see if your ribs flare upward when you do things. Okay, so you can keep one hand here and see, does that hand stay in place or does it begin to flare and raise as my arm comes overhead? We don't want that to happen. We want that to stabilize. Hopefully that's helpful. Okay. All right. I'm going to mute everybody and we're going to head back on. So the key there, can everybody see that okay? Actually, I don't think you guys can.
Not yet.
Sorry about that. So the key when we're into standing, obviously being aware of that alignment, but the key is don't be lazy. Lots of times people stand and they're lazy all the time. They're looking at their cell phones. They're not paying attention to their body. They're paying attention to all sorts of stimulus around them. Pay attention to yourself. So when you're standing, there's an expression called make your combat stance your everyday stance, meaning be ready, be open, and be active, right? So if we get into that position here, you can see if we're lazy, our head starts to pull forward, and they call this text neck and things like that. But it's amazing to see when you change that angle of the neck, even 30 degrees, that's 40 extra pounds through our tissue. We've talked about the consequences of bad breath in the previous slides, but man, the consequence of bad posture, that's just lazy. And you're actually expending a ton more energy than what's necessary, especially now, you know, because you just practiced what you should be doing. So being aware of this, oh my goodness, it helps your body in so many different ways that are easy and fixable for everybody. So the cues that I give people in this position are, we want the head stacked over the neck stacked over the body. We do have natural curvature here, but you can see there is a pitch forward. So if I were to draw a force line through her neck, it would be up on a diagonal. Now she should have natural curves here, but still that overall head should be stacked over our body, right? And if we were to draw a line from her inner ear here, it should go down pretty much straight through her body down to her hips, okay? Our stomach should be, you know, a little bit on. That breath control that we were doing, we still should have a soft belly, but there still should be about 20% of your abdominal contraction. So I had you do that forced expiration so you could feel what 100% contraction truly feels like in your core. You only need 20% of that when you're actually standing and moving around your day. All right. Now, if we go down to the shoulders next, the shoulders over here are rolled forward. Okay, and you can see how that drops the ribs down and kind of relaxes and pooches out her belly a little bit. Again, that's not ideal. This would be lazy. This would be active, right? I took a self-defense course when I was a kid, thanks to my parents, and the police officer who taught the class, he immediately could pick out, he's like, you're gonna be a victim, you're gonna be fine, you're gonna be a victim. And the reason he could pick that out is because of this right here. Who was lazy and not very confident in their posturing and their awareness in the surroundings. This gal, I would be much less likely to think that she could be a victim, right? She is active in her posture. The other thing about the shoulder, we talked about this rounding forward. We want them rounded back. A lot of times people will compensate by shrugging them up and back. We don't want that. We actually want to be like this gentleman right here, where his shoulders are back and technically he's in a little bit of external rotation, but then just his lower hands fold inward. He's not bringing his shoulders around like this gal is to bring his hands forward. He's maintaining good posture, but just bringing his hands to where they are. You'll also notice there's a little trick about this posture right here, is his hands are at his diaphragm. I love to teach people to stand that way because then you cue your breath. Because if you breathe above your hands, you're usually not doing it well. If you breathe below your hands, now you're in the money, right? Okay, the last thing we want to talk about is your hips and your feet here. So these feet are pointing straight ahead. When we stand or walk, our feet and our skeletal system is designed to be straight. I'm sure you've seen people with the toes pointing outward. That is not how we're engineered. I don't care who told you that. So we are engineered to have our feet straight, okay? And there's lots of reasons why that doesn't happen, but it should, and you can practice and create the stimulus on your body to get that to be pointing straight ahead. If you're driving a car and your front tires are pointed outward like this, you're not gonna get very far without something breaking down. Your body is the same way. We are engineered to have our feet and our tires straight. If you don't load them that way, things will break down over time. You will begin to have things like plantar fasciitis, medial knee pain, so causing maybe meniscus damage in there, or patellar tracking issues. You'll also create a whole slew of hip and low back problems. So feet are straight, and then they should be screwed into the ground. So I know a couple of you have worked with me before, and so I want you to think about your feet are on paper plates. So all of you should be standing right now, feeling these cues that I'm giving you. Your feet are pointing straight ahead, and they should be screwed into the floor to create torque. So what I want you to do right now, again, pretend your feet are on paper plates. They're not actually probably going to move on the floor if you're wearing shoes, but pretend you're going to generate the force as if you're screwing those into the ground, and you should feel some tension and tightening up here at the hip because you are literally externally rotating your femurs, your thigh bones, into the floor, okay? That creates a great deal of stability that we should be taking advantage of. So when you stand, so if you ever watch me speak or things like that, usually I'll stand with my hands around my diaphragm for that cue, and then my feet are screwed into the floor, my glutes are slightly contracted at about that 20% intensity. So when we are talking about position, you should feel with all of these cues, like you could generate some serious power right now if you wanted to, because position equals power, okay? So does anyone have questions on that before we move on to the next movement?
Elle, can you give a quick demo of what you recommend as proper cell phone posture, even though it's a sort of a necessary evil these days?
Sure. For cell phone posture, if you are sitting, I usually, turn my thing down a little bit, I usually like to have people's arms supported on something, whether it's an armrest or a desk and so on, but then this should be in front of you. And ideally, we talked about feet being screwed into the floor, your arms should be screwed into external rotation as well. So this position right here is wonderful to utilize. And then I can still keep my head over my neck and my body, keep everything stacked, because it's the temptation is with this, not only that the head comes forward, but then the shoulders roll forward as well. So we need to try to optimize the shoulder and the neck by getting ourselves upright, the shoulders in a little bit of that extra rotation, hands screwed in as much as we can to keep this position. It's really hard to hold good posture for a long period of time, okay? Because we're engineered to move. We're not engineered to hold prolonged periods of posture in any sense, whether it's good or bad. We're meant to move. So ideally in that position, if you were standing, the rules are the same. You should not be looking down. And if you watched Alexandra Copeland's lecture or webinar series, she talks as well about the distance here. So if you have to hold on to it, that's the best position to keep your body in. But the other option is to use something to hold that screen so that you can optimize the distance there as well for eye health. Okay. So I see one more question came in, I think. Do we need to address that now or should we go on, Jeremy?
You're good to go.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to talk about the squat. Let's see, we got just a little bit more time. So this is something that's incredibly important as humans that we be able to do. Squats get a bad rap, okay? Because they hurt knees, right? And they hurt backs is what people will say. Well, they shouldn't if you do them right, right? If you're stabilizing your core and prioritizing your spine, then it shouldn't hurt your back. If you're loading your hips as your primary engine and not your knees as your secondary engine, using that first, then it shouldn't hurt your knees. So the squats don't hurt your knees, your technique hurts your knees, right? But the squat is the most beautiful expression of full range of motion in the lower extremity. So your legs, meaning your ankles, your knees, and your hips. Most of us live in half range of motion, in that mid-range of range of motion. So if you never work on these end positions, then you won't be able to have strength or stability within them. So for today, we're just kind of going to look at the hip complex of here, but I want to know, I'm going to open up here and I'm going to show you how I can squat down, and I want to know if anybody else can just sit down in that position. So feet are straight, just like the picture of that little kid and also that big man. That guy's name is Kelly Starrett. He is another physical therapist. Can anybody else get down into that deep position in full range of motion of your hip, of your knee, and of your ankle? Can you still do that with feet straight, feet flat, upright posture, just like what he's doing? So I don't have anybody's mutes off, but I'm guessing if I did, I would hear a little bit of things like that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I hear not with my, they can't do it with their feet flat on the ground. Okay. I see Sherry smiling and kind of laughing.
My knees won't bend.
Sister. Okay, I see somebody.
No.
Okay, who has black trousers and a teal top?
That's Laurel.
Laurel. Okay, Laurel, put your feet straight and get your knees out. Because if you guys see on Laurel, there you go, get your knees out. If that's a good job, but keep your feet straight, Laurel, because the minute her knees come out and she takes her feet with her, she's on a slippery surface, so it's going to be a little tough for her to grip there. But once her knees come out and her feet are straight, she creates an arch in her foot, which is a much prettier position for loading of the foot, right? But as you can see, Laurel's got really good range of motion of her hip, really good range of motion of her knee. There we go. I can see Tom doing that. Great job. So the squat, again, is that expression of full range of motion of the lower extremity. So if you want to optimize range of motion and such, this is a great position to do that in. And it's one culturally across the world that is much more accepted than in the United States. Even us, we don't even spend much time sitting on the ground to work on the mobility required for that position. So just alone, sitting on the ground can be a great way to increase your mobility and your stability during that movement and position. It's also something that you wouldn't think about, but that's getting in and out of a chair is a squat, okay? It's just not full range, but we need to be able to do that without problem, okay? So I'm gonna share my screen one more time again, and we're gonna talk about, now that you've done that testing of how far you can get down, let's look at one joint to see if we can change this test, okay? So this is called the dragon position or the dragon stretch. There's lots of different variations here, but level 1 with this, we're actually gonna do right now, okay? You're gonna see the front leg is vertical, so that front shin is vertical. Her hands are inside of that front leg and her back leg is straight, okay? You'll notice this leg right here almost looks like that gentleman in the last slide for the squat, okay? So we're deep into the hip flexion on the front leg with the knee coming up towards the shoulder. You may also feel this in the front of the back leg. That would be good too. So folks who are just starting out, this would be kind of level 1. It's just getting into this position to open up the hips. If you want to get a little bit more higher level, you begin to contract, relax, just like we did with our breath. Where you get into this position, we would hold for probably 25 seconds, and then you're going to contract by almost trying to bring your body down together, bringing your knee towards your chest for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax. And you should feel when you relax, you drop even deeper into that stretch. So for those of you who want to stay in level 1 and just hold this position, go ahead and do so. If you want to stay in level 2, you can just do that contract, bringing your knee to your chest option, okay? And then just for the sake of time, I'm gonna show you one more version, and this is pushing this knee out. So we've got lots of things happening right here in this position, depending upon your level, but this really helps you loosen some things up so that we can get into a better squat position. So release that, switch sides, and you can start to see my straight leg now. My hands are vertical. Actually, my arms are vertical, stacked over my hands. And we're going to start with that contract, relax now. So go ahead and bring your chest and your knee together, just like you're contracting, trying to fold in half. For 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then relax. Drop the hips even further. And then just for the sake of time, like we said, we're just going to push that knee outward to try to open up the hip even more. Good. Now that's a very abbreviated version since we're short on time. But now see, can you get deeper into that squat? Maybe feet a little straighter, hips a little bit more comfortable, maybe a little bit more upright posture. So that's a really nice thing you can test your squat position. Do a technique, see if it helps you, and then you can retest the squat position again to see can you get even further. So just like in standing, You can test it, do a treatment, and then see if it makes that position better, maybe more range of motion, less pain, just less resistance, whatever it might be. We're applying that same principle right now to the squat, okay? So ultimately, in summary, when you are approaching your life and you're making these questions for yourself, you get to think, am I in the best position? That's really the first place, is just drawing awareness to yourself, just like when you are standing. So today, when you're standing, making dinner, let's say at home, or if you're on a Zoom meeting and you've been sitting too long, am I in the best position? Yes or no? You can answer that now easily. You don't have to make it complicated. It's yes or no. Then you can ask when you're walking to the mailbox, let's say, because I know we're not going to be doing tons of, social gatherings right now, but are you moving in the best way? Yes or no? Are your feet turned out? Are you hunched? Are your ribs down? Are they flared up? Are you moving properly? Yes or no? The other question to ask yourself is, do you have a movement practice or a maintenance practice on yourself? Because if you don't, that means you're probably not checking in and drawing awareness to yourself to figure out what you need, right? So things like this, I've given you a couple techniques, not a ton, but just a couple, so that you can take these over the next week and practice them. And then see how much your body changes in just a week. And even if you take just the breathing and see how you feel in just a week, collect some data, run your own personal science experiment, that scientific method we talked about, and see what your conclusions and results are. And so even right now, as we're talking and you're listening, are you breathing well? Yes or no? And then if you want to go even a step further for health, are you eating right? Yes or no? Are you sleeping well? Yes or no? We're going to dive into those topics even more in the future. So for summary, work at the limits of your capacity and your understanding. Obviously consider safety first, like that dragon pose. Go slowly if you've never been in that position before, and listen to your body. You should come away from everything you do, whether it's 1 repetition or 20,000 of them, you should come away unharmed. Okay? Our body is tough, there's no doubt about it, but you still should be making smart choices in how you're doing it. Then practice. Do this every day, check in with yourself, even if it's for 5 minutes. Okay? Our body is designed to be worked. So you have to practice these principles in order to create those neuromotor patterns to make them become reflexive. So even just learning today about breath control doesn't mean it's like a light switch and you've automatically got it. We want you to practice, take these principles, start to have kind of like layer 1 and get that smooth and grooved in, and then we can layer on number 2 next week. And just do the best you can. Give yourself grace. Just like we noticed some people don't have perfect squat mobility yet and things like that, but you can. And optimizing and getting full range of motion of your legs is really important. So give yourself grace over this process. And the key to learning these new things is just practice and repetitions. And last but not least, the first thing I said today was humans are meant to. So avoid those static positions and those prolonged periods of time, because that's not what we're engineered to do, and that will not help your health. So move, move, move. So next week, we've talked about some of these position kind of struggles and things. Next week, we're gonna have you bring 2 tennis balls or 2 balls around the size of tennis balls. If you don't have any, let me know. If you're local to Kalamazoo, I have plenty, and I'd be happy to loan you some. But you can use that cheap tool to work on tension, and we'll show you all sorts of different ways to do that all over your body, and it'll be the best investment you've ever made. So thank you guys so much for being here. Stop sharing my screen now. Ask any questions that they like. A couple coming in. So, all right. So does anyone have any questions that I can answer? Either, it looks like Tom has one. Here, Tom, you're unmuted, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the squat. For me, kind of pushing your butt back as you're going into the squat really makes a big difference. Is that a proper description of it?
Absolutely, because when you put your hips back, you actually load the hips first. But if you drive your knees forward, you're loading your knees first, right? And that is a secondary engine. We don't want that. We want to keep as much in your primary engine as possible. So that would be super, super smart to do and appropriate for your organization.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else have any other questions? Not, that's okay, because I know
We
we
covered them all.
That's good. All right. So thank you guys so much for being here. If you guys are interested, we'd love to have you next week when we talk about some of the tension things that you can do on your own to relieve some of the pain. We're going to get a lot of time up here in this upper back because we talked about the role with breathing with that. So as we talk about good breathing, we still might have to go in and undo some of the tension that has built up over the years from bad breathing. So that'll be wonderful. And Lord knows we all could use it during this time of stress. So come on next week. We'd love to have you. And then if you have any other questions, you know where to find us. Obviously, mindsetpt.com is a great way to get there. And then you saw my email is ellen@mindsetpt.com. So you're welcome to use that too. This recording will go up on our website, so feel free to share that with anybody. We're happy to spread out the information and answer anybody else's questions. So thank you guys so much for being here. We love you more than you know. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.